The great chamber of the Xylo's convocation was a testament to harmony, a living cathedral of bioluminescent coral and polished obsidian. Its vaulted ceiling soared into an artificial twilight, where motes of glowing spores drifted like captive stars, illuminating the tiered platforms that spiraled down to the central dais. Here, light and shadow were not opposites, but partners in a delicate, millennia-old dance of aesthetic and purpose. Every surface, every curve, resonated with the faint, omnipresent hum of the voices. The celestial chorus that guided the Xylos, that was the Xylos, a psychic symphony of divine will that had shaped their civilization from primordial ooze to masters of their galactic arm. Yet today, a discordance unlike any known before had crept into the hallowed silence between the hums. It was the sharp, grating static of fear. High Executor Kalen stood on the precipice of the highest platform, his ceremonial robes of woven light kelp cascading around his slender, chitinous frame. His multifaceted eyes, usually calm pools of liquid silver, now swirled with troubled nebulae as he gazed down upon the assembled speakers. They were the finest minds, the most devout souls, the collective consciousness of a species that had never known true doubt. But doubt was here now, an unwelcome guest in this sanctuary of certainty. The debate had raged for cycles, a storm of eloquent panic and righteous fury. The subject was a species from the voidward darkness, a young and chaotic race that had spilled from their solitary cradle world with the explosive, unguided energy of a supernova. They called themselves humans. The Xylos archives had designated them an anomaly, a civilization that had achieved interstellar travel without first achieving societal harmony, a people who reveled in their discordant individuality and worshipped no gods but the fleeting phantoms of their own ambition. They were, by every metric the convocation held sacred, savages. Their ships were brutalist wedges of gray metal, devoid of the organic grace that defined Xylo's starcraft. Their communications were a cacophony of competing signals, a testament to their lack of a unifying voice. They expanded not with the elegant, predetermined purpose of a growing coral reef, but with the random, cancerous logic of a slime mold, consuming resources and colonizing worlds with a startling and profane efficiency. "They are a pestilence," Speaker Vorn's voice boomed, amplified by the chamber's resonant architecture. He stood on a lower platform, his own robes a stark, aggressive crimson. His claws were clenched, his mandibles tight with a zealot's conviction. "A thinking plague that has breached the celestial quarantine. Their very existence is an affront to the divine order. They spread their profane silence wherever they go, a silence born of their empty souls, their godless minds. We have listened, as is our duty. We have extended our collective sensorium to their worlds, and what do we hear? Nothing. No great chorus, no unifying harmony. Only the shrill, isolated cries of individual minds lost in the darkness." Vorn gestured with a sweeping arm encompassing the entire chamber. "We are a symphony, they are noise, and noise must be silenced." A murmur of agreement rippled through the lower tiers. Kalen felt the collective sentiment wash over him, a tide of righteous certainty. Vorn's words resonated with a deep, primal truth that had defined their people for eons. The voices were their strength, their clarity. A species without such a guide was a ship without a navigator, adrift on the cosmic currents, a danger to themselves and to all they encountered. And yet, Kalen's gaze drifted to the holographic display that shimmered at the chamber's center. It showed a rotating schematic, a crude and incomplete rendering of a particular human vessel, compiled from fragmented long-range scans. It was an ugly, asymmetrical thing, a shard of obsidian bristling with unknown protuberances. Xylo's intelligence had struggled to classify its function. It bore few recognizable weapon emplacements, its energy signature was bafflingly complex, and its mission profile was erratic. It would appear at the edge of a system where the voices were particularly strong, linger for a time as if listening, and then depart, leaving behind a subtle, yet measurable dampening of the divine resonance. It was this ship, more than any other, that stoked the convocation's fear. They had given it a name in their own tongue, a fearful guttural curse that translated crudely to the tongue cutter. "Speaker Vorn's passion is, as always, a credit to his devotion," began Speaker Lyra, her voice a calming countermelody to Vorn's fiery oration. Her platform was adjacent to Vorn's, yet a universe of temperament seemed to separate them. Her robes were the deep blue of twilight oceans, and her movements were fluid, deliberate. But devotion must be tempered with understanding. "The data on these humans is contradictory. You say they are chaotic, yet their expansion is coordinated. You say they are primitive, yet their technology allows them to traverse the void with an ease that rivals our own. You speak of their silence, but our deep space analysts report that their transmissions are not empty. They are dense with information, with complex mathematics, with art of a strange and compelling geometry. It is a language we do not yet understand, but it is not the babbling of savages. Kalen shifted his weight, the light kelp of his robes whispering against the polished floor. Lyra's words mirrored the disquiet in his own soul. He had reviewed the same reports. He had listened to the intercepted human transmissions, filtered and translated by their most sophisticated linguistic engines. It was true, they lacked a unifying psychic presence, but they were not silent. They broadcast symphonies of structured sound, epic poems of their own tumultuous history, scientific treatises of breathtaking complexity. It was as if every human was a voice, and their civilization was a library of countless books, each telling a different story, yet all written in the same language of shared biology and aspiration. It was bewildering. To the Xylos, a civilization was a single, perfect song, composed by the divine voices and sung in unison by every member of the species. The humans were a choir where every singer performed their own composition simultaneously. The resulting sound should have been chaos, yet somehow, through it all, they built starships, they terraformed worlds, they reached for the stars. Understanding them is irrelevant, Vorn countered, his voice sharp enough to chip obsidian. Do we seek to understand a virus before we purge it? Do we negotiate with a blight that threatens the sacred garden? Their most blasphemous creation, the vessel they deploy to the very nodes of our divine communion, is proof of their intent. This tongue cutter is a weapon of spiritual warfare. It is designed to sever our connection to the voices, to deafen us to the word of our gods. It is a tool of pure sacrilege, and its existence is an act of war. The chamber hummed with renewed agitation. The name, spoken aloud, carried a weight of terror, the tongue cutter, a ship designed to commit deicide. The very concept was so profoundly alien, so monstrous, that it defied rational thought. To the Xylos, the voices were not an external deity to be worshipped. They were an integral part of their consciousness, an extension of their senses. To be cut off from them would not be like losing one's faith. It would be like having one's eyes gouged out, one's ears filled with lead, one's soul hollowed into a vacant shell. It would be a living death. The fear was primal. It was the terror of sensory deprivation, of absolute, eternal solitude. Kalen raised a hand, and a soft chime echoed through the hall, calling for silence. The murmuring ceased, every multifaceted eye turning towards him. He was the high executor, the fulcrum upon which the collective will balance. His role was not to lead, but to distill, to find the single, perfect note of consensus within the symphony of their debate. The threat is acknowledged, Speaker Vorn. The anomaly is recognized, Speaker Lyra. For generations, we have lived in the light of the voices. They have guided us to peace, to stability, to a perfect and unchanging harmony. Our society is a reflection of a divine, cosmic order. These humans represent the antithesis of that order. They are change. They are chaos. They are the unknown. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the profound silence of the chamber. He looked again at the schematic of the human ship, the dark and menacing vessel that haunted their thoughts. The nature of their weapon is horrifying, but it is the philosophy behind such a weapon that we must truly fear. To even conceive of such a thing, to build a tool not to kill the body, but to assassinate the soul, what kind of a species does this? What void must exist in their own spirit that they would seek to create one in ours? He turned his gaze from the hologram and swept it across the assembled speakers, his voice dropping to a low, resonant frequency that every Xylos present felt in their very marrow. We have assumed they are savages because they lack our harmony. But what if their nature is not savagery, but something far more dangerous? What if it is a form of logic so cold, so alien, that it sees our faith not as sacred, but as a weakness to be exploited, a variable to be eliminated? The air in the chamber grew heavy, the glowing spores seeming to dim as if in shared apprehension. Kalen had given voice to the unspoken fear that lay beneath the anger and the confusion. It was not that the humans were primitive beasts. It was that they were something utterly other, a form of intelligence that had evolved along a pathway the Xylos could not even see. Comprehend, a species that had learned to live in the silence had, perhaps, learned to master it, and now they were bringing that silence to others. Therefore, Kalen continued, his voice regaining its authority, we must act, not with the blind fury of a cornered animal, Speaker Vorn, nor with the hesitant curiosity of a scholar, Speaker Lyra. We must act as the Xylos collective, as one will, one voice, one purpose. We will dispatch a fleet to the designated human frontier. It will be a fleet of great power, a demonstration of our resolve, but its primary purpose will not be to destroy, but to deliver an ultimatum. He straightened to his full height, the light kelp of his robes shimmering like a captured galaxy. We will demand they cease their blasphemous incursions. We will demand they dismantle their profane weapon. We will demand they listen, for the first time, not to the cacophony of their own minds, but to a true voice, a higher power that offers them a chance to turn from their path of chaos and embrace the harmony of the divine order. They will be given a choice, submission or purification. A deep, resonant chord of consensus swelled from the assembled speakers, the symphony finally finding its key. It was a decisive, unified sound. Vorn's desire for action was satisfied, Lyra's call for a measured approach was honored, and Kalen's synthesis of their views had forged a path forward. The ultimatum was a test. The human response would reveal their true nature. If they were savages, they would react with mindless aggression. If they were something else, something colder and more calculating, their response would be different. Fleet Commander Torvin stood on the bridge of the Celestial Harmony, the flagship of the Purification Fleet. Around him, the command deck was a seamless fusion of technology and biology, just like the great chamber of the Convocation. Control consoles pulsed with a soft internal light, their surfaces warm and yielding to the touch. The forward view screen was not a screen at all, but a vast, transparent membrane of living crystal that offered a perfect, unfiltered view of the stardusted void. And arrayed in that void was his fleet, a celestial armada of graceful, powerful vessels, each one a work of art, a predator disguised as a poem. They moved in perfect, synchronized formations, their drives leaving behind shimmering trails of ionized light, a fleet of comets bound by a single divine will. Torvin felt the comforting presence of the voices in his mind, a constant, reassuring whisper that affirmed the righteousness of his mission. He was an instrument of that will, a guardian of the sacred harmony, and he felt no fear, only a profound sense of purpose. Their destination was a system on the very edge of human expansion, a place the Xylos designated as a source of significant spiritual dissonance. It was here that the tongue cutter had been most recently detected. The journey had been silent, swift, and imbued with a sense of holy dread. The crew moved with the quiet efficiency of the devout. They were ready for a battle, ready for a cleansing, ready to defend their very souls from the encroaching silence. The system's star was a stark, blue-white giant, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the single, terraformed world that orbited it. It was a human colony. From orbit, it looked scarred, a world that had been brutally reshaped rather than gently coaxed into habitability. Geometric patterns of agriculture and industry were etched onto its surface, a testament to the humans' aggressive, domineering relationship with nature. Sensors detected a single vessel in high orbit. Torvin's mandibles tightened. It was waiting for them. The schematic from the Convocation chamber resolved into a horrifying reality on the crystal view screen. The human ship was a void-black predator, a thing of sharp angles and flat, non-reflective surfaces that seemed to drink the harsh starlight, giving nothing back. It was everything Xylo's design was not, graceless, menacing, and utterly, terrifyingly alien. There were no lights, no visible viewports, no external signs of life. It was a tomb drifting through the void. This was it, the axiom as the humans called it, the tongue cutter. "It is alone, Commander," his tactical officer reported, her voice a soft, melodic chime that belied the tension on the bridge. "No other vessels in the system. Its energy signature is dormant. It is not powering weapons or shields." Torvin processed the information. Alone, they had sent a fleet that could pacify a star system, and the humans met them with a single, silent ship. It was either supreme arrogance or a trap of unfathomable cunning. He felt Speaker Vorn's presence behind him, a prickle of zealous energy. The speaker had insisted on accompanying the fleet to witness the savages' submission or their righteous destruction. "Arrogant primitives," Vorn hissed, his voice a low growl of contempt. "They believe. One shadow can stand against the sun. They know nothing of true power." "Open a communications channel," Torvin commanded, his voice steady. "Broadcast the ultimatum on all frequencies. Let them hear the will of the Convocation." The ultimatum was sent, a powerful, multi-spectrum transmission containing the full weight of Xylo's authority, the demand for cessation of movement, the dismantling of the profane vessel, and the acceptance of divine guidance. It was a declaration of spiritual superiority, a final offer of salvation before the inevitable purification. For a long moment there was only silence. The black ship drifted, impassive, a hole in the fabric of space. Torvin felt a flicker of doubt. What if they simply refused to answer? What if they were so alien they didn't even comprehend the concept of submission to a higher authority? Then a channel opened. Not with a blast of static or a defiant war cry, but with a calm, perfectly modulated tone. A voice emerged from the bridge's audio emitters, smooth and resonant. It was a female human voice, speaking flawless, unaccented Xylo's high dialect. The linguistic precision was shocking. It was the voice of a scholar, not a savage. "This is Ambassador Eva Rostova of the human vessel Axiom. We receive your transmission, Fleet Commander Torvin of the Xylos Collective. We acknowledge your concerns." The calm professionalism of the response was more disorienting than any threat would have been. There was no fear, no anger, no pleading, just a simple, factual acknowledgement. Torvin exchanged a glance with his communications officer, whose antennae were twitching in confusion. Even Vorn was momentarily silenced. "Ambassador Rostova," Torvin replied, recovering his composure. "You have heard our terms. There is no negotiation. You will comply, or your vessel and your colony will be sanctified by the light of our fleet. This is the will of the voices, the divine authority of our people." There was another pause, a beat of silence that felt longer than it was. When the ambassador spoke again, her tone was unchanged, still serene, still measured. But her words struck the bridge with the force of a physical blow. "We understand your devotion to the beings you call the voices. We have observed their transmissions for a considerable period of your history. We have studied their effect on your civilization. We must ask, Fleet Commander, a question born not of malice, but of sincere inquiry. Do you truly understand their nature?" The question was a detonation of heresy in the sanctified space of the Xylos Bridge. It was not a rejection of their faith, but a questioning of its very foundation, delivered with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a microbe under a lens. It implied the humans knew more about the Xylos' gods than the Xylos did themselves. Vorn let out a choked gasp of pure fury. "Blasphemy! Utter unspeakable blasphemy! They mock the divine! Commander, this is their answer." An insult cloaked in false civility. "Purge them, purge this filth from the heavens." Torvin felt a wave of cold fury wash over him. The calm, condescending tone of the human had ignited his own devout heart. To question the voices was to question the very fabric of reality. He gave the order his entire life had been leading up to. Tactical, fire a warning shot. A demonstration. Target the space a ship's length from their bow. Let them witness a particle of the sun we command. "Commander, their shields are still down," the tactical officer warned. "A direct hit, even a glancing one, would be catastrophic for them." "That is their choice," Vorn snarled. "Let them feel the consequence of their heresy." The command was given. A beam of pure, coherent energy, a lance of miniature starlight, erupted from the Celestial Harmony's primary weapon array. It crossed the void in an instant, aimed not to hit, but to intimidate, to scorch the darkness directly in front of the human vessel, a definitive statement of power. But the Axiom did not move. It did not raise its shields. It did not fire back. As the Xylos' energy beam approached, the black ship did something that defied all known principles of physics and warfare. It did not block the energy. It did not evade it. It simply absorbed it. The entire lance of incandescent power vanished into its dark hull without a flash, without a flare, without so much as a ripple of discharged energy. The ship just drank the starfire as if it were nothing. The Xylos Bridge fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Every officer, every crew member stared at the view screen, their multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. Their most powerful energy weapon had been neutralized as easily as a child tossing a pebble into the ocean. It was impossible. It was a violation of the laws of thermodynamics, of energy conservation. And then the Axiom responded, not with a weapon but with a sound, or rather a frequency. A single, pure, incredibly complex resonant wah. V projected from its hull. It wasn't a destructive wave. It carried no kinetic energy, no thermal radiation. It was something else entirely. It washed over the Xylos fleet, passing through their shields and hulls as if they weren't there. And on the bridge of the Celestial Harmony, the eternal, comforting hum of the voices suddenly flickered. For Torvin, the experience was agonizing. The divine symphony that had been the constant background music of his entire existence faltered, dissolving into a discordant shriek of static. The celestial whispers of guidance and reassurance were momentarily replaced by something else, something that had always been there, hidden beneath the melody. It was a raw, primal, and utterly alien sound. It was a sound of immense, ancient hunger, a psychic screech of a predator whose feeding had been interrupted. It was the sound of a parasite, not a god. The effect on the Xylos crew was instantaneous and devastating. They cried out, clutching their heads, their bodies convulsing. The loss of the voices, even for a few seconds, was a profound psychic trauma. It was like the floor of the universe had fallen away, leaving them in a terrifying, silent void. Torvin staggered back against his command console, his mind reeling from the shock and the hideous revelation of the sound that had replaced his gods. The hunger in that screech, it had been directed at them. They were not its children, they were its sustenance. Just as quickly as it had begun, the human frequency ceased. The familiar, comforting hum of the voices returned, rushing back into the minds of the Xylo's crew like a soothing balm. But it was different now. It was tainted. The memory of that parasitic screech lingered, a shadow that could never be unseen, a discordance that could never be unheard. They now knew what lay beneath the beautiful song. Then Ambassador Rostova's voice returned, as calm and serene as ever, but now imbued with a terrible, undeniable authority. "We have transmitted our full data analysis to your flagship, Commander Torvin. Spectrographic analysis of the psychic frequency, neurological resonance patterns, and a complete bioenergetic profile accumulated over 73 of your orbital cycles of observation. The entities you call the voices are a non-corporeal, psychic parasite species. They attach themselves to the collective consciousness of developing civilizations, feeding on your psychic energy, your emotional output. In return, they provide a sense of harmony, of purpose, of divine guidance. They cultivate you. They pacify you. They turn entire species into a placid, sustainable food source. The harmony they provide is the tranquility of the herd. The peace they enforce is the stillness of stagnation." A data stream flooded the Celestial Harmony's computers. Torvin's science officers stared at their consoles, their antennae drooping in shock. The human data was flawless, terrifyingly comprehensive. It showed the energy patterns of the voices, tracing them back to a singularity in a dark nebula, a nest of unimaginable psychic energy. It showed how their own brainwaves were subtly altered, their capacity for radical innovation and chaotic, individualistic thought suppressed. It showed, with cold, irrefutable mathematics, that their civilization's technological and philosophical development had flatlined the moment they had made full contact with the voices millennia ago. They had been living in a beautiful, gilded cage, singing praises to their zookeeper. "Our vessel," Ambassador Rostova continued, her voice echoing in the horrified silence of the bridge, "is not a weapon in the way you understand it. It does not destroy ships or kill bodies. It is a surgical instrument, a resonant scalpel designed for a single purpose, to sever the parasitic link without permanently harming the host. You called it the tongue cutter. The term is crude, but not entirely inaccurate. We have come not to wage war on you, but to offer you a choice that is not predicated on a lie. We are here to cut the tongue of a false god, so that you might, for the first time, speak with your own voice." Speaker Vorn was on his knees, his crimson robes pooled around him like blood. He was trembling, not with rage, but with a terror so profound it had shattered his very being. He was muttering over and over, "No, lies, savage lies, the voices are love, the voices are truth." But his words were hollow, the desperate mantra of a man whose cathedral had just crumbled to dust around him. Torvin looked from the broken speaker to the impassive black ship on the view screen. He looked at the faces of his crew, at the dawning horror and confusion in their multifaceted eyes. The humans hadn't attacked them. They had diagnosed them. They had held up a mirror and forced the Xylos to see the puppet strings attached to their souls. They had called them savages, but they were the ones who had been domesticated, tamed, and farmed by an entity they mistook for a god. The humans, in their chaotic, godless silence, were free, and they had just offered the Xylos the most terrifying gift imaginable: freedom. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was filled with the deafening weight of truth. The revelation sent a schism through the Xylos fleet. On the bridge of the Celestial Harmony, a fragile, terrifying new reality began to dawn. Torvin, his mind still echoing with the phantom screech of the parasite, stared at the human data now displayed on the main view screen. The elegant equations and cold, hard facts painted a picture of millennia of deception. Their history, their culture, their very thoughts had been curated by a celestial farmer. The weight of this truth was crushing, a gravitational force that threatened to pull their entire civilization into a black hole of despair. He looked at his crew. Some were paralyzed by shock, their devout certainty replaced by a vacant, hollow-eyed dread. Others were beginning to process the implications, their antennae twitching with a mixture of fear and a new, unfamiliar spark of analytical curiosity. They were seeing the universe through their own eyes for the very first time. But Speaker Vorn was beyond reason. He staggered to his feet, his face a mask of incandescent fury, his faith not merely broken but pathologically inflamed by the assault. He refused to accept the truth. The alternative, a universe without the voices, was so profoundly empty to him that madness was a preferable shelter. "Lies!" he screamed, his voice a ragged shriek that grated against the new, pure silence of the bridge. "A trick! A savage's deception to poison our souls. Commander Torvin, you are a soldier of the divine will. Destroy that ship. Destroy the source of this blasphemy. Let the voices return in their full glory and cleanse our minds of this taint." Torvin turned to face the speaker, his own expression one of grim, weary clarity. "Did you not hear it, speaker? Beneath the song, the hunger." "It was a phantom, a human projection," Vorn shot back, his eyes wild. "They are psychic warriors, masters of illusion. Do not listen to the serpent in the void. Listen to your god." He pointed a trembling claw at Torvin. "If you will not give the order, I will. I am an agent of the convocation, a direct conduit of the divine will. I order you to open fire." A profound and dangerous division was occurring. The psychic parasites, sensing the imminent loss of their control, their herd beginning to question the fence, began to exert their power directly. A wave of immense psychic pressure washed over the fleet, far more powerful than the gentle, guiding hum they were accustomed to. This was not a whisper of reassurance. It was a roar of command, a psychic shackle tightening around their minds. The voices were no longer singing. They were screaming. "Obey. Destroy the anomaly. Forget the doubt. Harmony is obedience. Obedience is survival." On the bridge, several officers cried out, their bodies stiffening as they fought a war within their own skulls. The comforting presence had become a tyrant, demanding absolute submission. Vorn embraced it, his face contorting into a mask of ecstatic agony. "Yes, hear them. Their power, their truth, they are with us. Fire!" he bellowed, lunging for a weapons console, intending to bypass Torvin's command. But Torvin was no longer a slave. The memory of that parasitic screech, combined with the cold logic of the human data, had become his anchor in the psychic storm. He shoved the speaker back, his strength surprising even himself. "No!" he commanded, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "We will not be their puppets." He turned to his tactical officer, who was struggling against the mental onslaught, his hands shaking above his console. "Disengage weapon systems. All ships defensive posture only." The fleet fractured. Some ships, their commanders more deeply enthralled or weaker of will, began to power their weapons, their hulls glowing with imminent destructive intent, obeying the psychic command of their masters. Other ships, like the Celestial Harmony, held their ground, their crews fighting a desperate internal battle for their own sanity. A Xylo's civil war was about to erupt in the cold light of this alien star, a war fought between those who chose a comforting lie and those who were brave enough to face a terrifying truth. Before a single shot could be fired, the human ship moved. The Axiom, the tongue cutter, began to glide forward, its black hull a sliver of perfect night against the stars. It moved not with the aggression of a warship, but with the serene, deliberate grace of a master surgeon entering an operating theater. It did not power weapons. Instead, its hull began to resonate again, emitting that same impossibly complex frequency, but this time it was not a brief, diagnostic pulse. It was a sustained, modulated wave, a continuous projection of pure, cleansing psi. See? The Axiom moved between the Loyalist and the newly awakened factions of the Xylo's fleet. It projected its resonant field with incredible precision, not as a blanket effect, but as a series of focused beams. It targeted the ships that were still under the parasite's control. On the bridge of the Celestial Harmony, Torvin watched in awe as the divine screaming in his mind was cut off, not just for him, but for his entire fleet. The human ship was creating a quarantine of absolute psychic silence around them, protecting them from their own gods. But for the ships still preparing to fire, the effect was more dramatic. The Axiom focused its beam on one of the Loyalist cruisers. The cruiser's weapon systems, glowing with imminent discharge, suddenly went dark. On Torvin's view screen, he could see the ship's running lights flicker erratically. He could imagine the scene on that ship's bridge, a crew suddenly and violently disconnected from the psychic entity that had controlled them. They were not killed. They were not attacked. They were liberated. The process was repeated, ship by ship. The Axiom moved through the Xylo's fleet, its resonant frequency a scalpel of pure mathematics, precisely and cleanly severing the parasitic connections one by one. It was a rescue on a scale Torvin could barely comprehend. They had brought a fleet to purify the humans, and in return the humans were purifying them. The psychic entities, their collective consciousness being dismembered, fought back. The pressure intensified to an unbearable degree around Speaker Vorn. The entity to which he was most devoutly connected tried to make him its anchor, its final bastion of control in the fleet. He convulsed on the deck, screaming as millennia of concentrated psychic energy funneled into his mind. His multifaceted eyes glowed with a malevolent alien light. He was no longer a Xylos. He was a vessel, a puppet animated by the death throes of a dying god. But the Axiom's field was too precise, too powerful. With one final, focused pulse directed at the celestial harmony itself, the connection was severed. Vorn collapsed, the alien light in his eyes extinguished, leaving only the empty, staring gaze of a man whose soul had been hollowed out and then abandoned. He was left a broken shell, a monument to a faith that had been a lie. When the last connection was cut, an unearthly silence descended upon the Xylos fleet. It was a silence unlike any they had ever known. It was not the absence of sound, but the absence of the voices. For the first time in their racial history, they were utterly, completely alone in their own minds. The silence was terrifying. It was vast. It was empty. But it was also clean. It was the silence of a blank page, the silence of a new beginning. Torvin stood on his bridge, surrounded by his shaken but now clear-headed crew. He looked at the human ship which had returned to its stationary position, its hull once again dormant, its purpose fulfilled. They had possessed the power to annihilate his fleet, to let them tear each other apart. Instead, they had performed the most profound act of non-violent intervention he had ever witnessed. They had not come to conquer. They had come to heal. With a gesture that felt heavy with the weight of a new era, Torvin ordered his communications officer to open a channel to the Axiom. There were no more ultimatums, no more threats. There was only a deep, humbling, and terrifying respect. "Ambassador Rostova," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "This is Commander Torvin. He hesitated, struggling to find the words. The vocabulary of his people had no precedent for this. "You had the power to destroy us. Our faith made us your enemy. We came here to extinguish you. Why? Why would you save us from a truth we were not even capable of seeing?" The ambassador's voice returned, still calm, still serene. But now it sounded less like the voice of a scholar and more like the voice of an ancient, weary philosopher. "To us, Fleet Commander, sentient consciousness is the universe's most precious and rarest resource. It is the mechanism by which the cosmos observes itself. To allow a sentient species to be consumed, to be pacified into a non-evolving state of being, is an act of cosmic waste we cannot abide. We do not destroy those who are enslaved. We offer them the tools for freedom. The choice to use those tools and what to build with them is theirs alone." A new, tentative alliance was forged in that moment, in the silent space between two ships, between two species who had met on the brink of war and had found an unexpected and profound kinship. The Xylos, for the first time, were masters of their own destiny. The humans had not given them answers, but rather the silence in which to find their own. In the cycles that followed, the Xylos began the slow, painful process of rebuilding their society, of rediscovering their own identity without the guiding, pacifying influence of the voices. Torvin, now acting as a liaison with the humans, worked closely with Ambassador Rostova. The humans shared their knowledge freely, not as conquerors but as mentors. They helped the Xylos stabilize their now silent psychic network, teaching them to build mental firewalls to protect the sanctity of their individual minds. The Axiom remained in orbit, a silent black guardian, a reminder of their liberation. As trust grew, the humans shared more of their own history, their own data. One day, Ambassador Rostova transmitted a final, heavily encrypted file to Torvin and to what remained of the convocation, now led by a humbled and contemplative speaker, Lyra. High Executor Kalen, watching from the Grand Chamber, saw the file decrypt on the central holographic display. It was not a weapon schematic or a piece of technology. It was a map. A star chart of a scale that dwarfed their known galaxy, encompassing countless other galaxies separated by gulfs of intergalactic void, so vast as to be incomprehensible. Dozens of galaxies on the map were marked with a subtle, shimmering icon. It was the energy signature of the psychic parasites. The beings the Xylos had called the Voices were not a local phenomenon. They were a galactic plague, a species of cosmic shepherds tending to their flocks across the universe. The scale of the enslavement was staggering, a silent, ongoing holocaust of consciousness that spanned eons. The Xylos had been just one herd among countless others. But there was something else on the map, a detail that made Kalen's breath catch in his throat. A single, faint line of energy, impossibly ancient, was traced from the void between two distant galactic clusters. It was not the chaotic, hungry signature of the parasites. It was a signal, structured, deliberate, and encoded in the universal language of pure mathematics. The humans had spent a century decoding it. The translation appeared below the map, stark and chilling against the stardusted black. The shepherds are many, their hunger is eternal, the harvest is ancient, we were the first flock. We built our civilization on the echoes of their thoughts, believing them to be our own. We mistook the shepherd's call for the voice of God. We failed to see the fence for the horizon. When we learned the truth, it was too late. We fought. We severed the connection, but our worlds were left in ruins, our minds scarred by the silence. We could not defeat them. They are too numerous, too entrenched, so we fled. We ran to the only place they cannot follow, the only place their psychic voices cannot reach. The great, empty silence between the star streams. We became nomads of the void. This is our warning. This is our testament. Do not look to the heavens for your gods. Look for the silence between them. That is where freedom began. That is where we wait. Kalen stood in the great, silent chamber of the convocation, the same chamber where they had debated the savagery of the humans. The bioluminescent coral seemed dimmer now, its light more fragile, more precious. He looked at the map, at the vast, terrifying, and wondrous universe it depicted. The humans were not the first to face this enemy. They were merely the next in a long, ancient line. They had not brought a war to the Xylos' doorstep. They had brought an invitation. An invitation to join a conflict far older and far more important than any squabble over territory or resources. A war for the soul of the universe itself. He understood now. Humanity was not savage. They were the inheritors of an ancient warning, a lonely vanguard in a war fought in the silent spaces of the mind. Their chaos was the chaos of true freedom. Their individualism was the defiant cry of a species that refused to be a single, harmonious herd. They had not come to conquer the Xylos. They had come to recruit them. High Executor Kalen looked out at the starfield simulated on the chamber's dome, but he no longer saw the comforting light of home. He saw a frontier. A dark, silent, and infinitely vast frontier where the greatest battle had yet to be fought, and where true gods were not found but forged in the quiet resolve of free minds. The journey was just beginning.